Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 4 of Sweet Tooth. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we finally, get back to Amy a little bit, and I thought that was kind of an interesting aspect of the episode. Well, first and foremost, obviously, her raising her daughter. And that also opens up many things. Like, that side of the story opens up that, right, obviously, like, Pigtail as well as, well, because she just refers to her as Pigtail. We don't know if that's like actually her name or is that just kind of a nickname. Just like Tommy gave Gus Sweet Tooth. It might be kind of similar in that thing, a naming convention, but it might not be like her actual name. But whatever the case, because I doubt it. That sounds like more like a nickname. But I think it's so interesting that it's like, right, showcasing that it is kind of like what I thought. We are going to be bouncing all around like the different time, lane, and frame. So, but... And I like talking about the fact is that obviously all Amy ever wanted was solitude, and now like she found something in the world to care about more so than anything. And obviously she's listening in on the radio, but she doesn't ever like respond because the last thing she needs is attention drawn to the zoo because she doesn't want anyone to find her daughter. It's like, especially she's been avoiding the last man like crazy, but her and her daughter going on a shopping spree, and you're just like, you're like, it's just one of those cute, adorable kid things. This show is going to do that to me. Like, you just see, you're like, oh, when you're dealing with like, you deal with like kids in your own life, just because I have my nieces and nephews, you're just like, oh, you guys can be such tools sometimes. But then you see kids on television, you're like, oh, that showed you like the good side of it. Granted, there's kind of the negative side that you kind of deal with on a regular basis, but it also kind of makes you reflect upon your life. I'm like, yeah, my nieces and nephew can be cute and funny in certain regards. They can be total D-bags in others, but still, but it's just like seeing like Amy, especially because for every time we saw Amy, she was just kind of alone and just to kind of have someone to share in this adventure with and stuff like that, much like, Gus has, Tommy and everything. So I thought that was so fascinating. But then there's also the thing about like, right, there's the missing carrots, and she's like, that had nothing to do with that. And then she kind of has this look like, like those guilty looks on kids' faces, and you're like, what's that all about? Like, are you? And then we find out she's feeding food to somebody. You're like, what's that about? Which I love that cute moment. Then she's like, oh, only 3 things, that's all. And it's like, I think it needs more. And she's like, no. And she's like, Mom, look at my nose and look at your nose. I think I'm the expert in this. And then later her mom's like, yeah, I need a little bit more salt. She's like, unbelievable. It's like, it's such a, in just a little bit of time just to see the cute dynamic they have. Because it's a similar situation to like Gus and Pubba, but at the same time, there's a little more freedom in it. Because it's the same dynamic in the sense that she is very overprotective considering the circumstances of the world. It makes sense, but at the same now it actually, in retrospect, now I think it makes sense. I'm gonna rewind what I said a little bit last episode, because the general was saying like, we found her who? Her. And I was thinking he was referencing Bear and them. He's referencing Amy. I mean, first and foremost, when we get introduced to Bobby, honestly, that was the most adorable thing. It was almost like an I Am Groot thing where it's like, me, Bobby, you're like, oh. And it's just like, it's a little freaky, but at the same time, it's like, that's actually the super adorable, especially like the overalls and everything. I was like, come on, dude, that's super cute. But then her to be like, welcome to the, like, you are welcome to the preserver. I was like, you're the one behind all that. That's so interesting, like how we're getting this story told like this. So it's like the preserve hasn't been around too long, has it? I mean, she has all these flyers and stuff like that. So the time frame still may not be what we think it is, because like it's so interesting. A lot of Netflix stuff has done that, like The Witcher, Jupiter's Legacy. Like the fact is, it kind of bounce all over the way, all over the place timeline, especially The Witcher, because you never realize until like later in the season, you're like, oh wow. Now, time is like all kinds of weird and crazy in this. So this is kind of bouncing around a different, like, I'd assume this is present day, but to go from like where she is now to like planes flying over, dropping flyers, that's some large scale operation. So there must be enough people backing her with this. So I think that's fascinating. I wonder, does it have anything to do with like Bear and her group? Because that seemed like they're kind of on a different level. Maybe eventually they end up linking up, because maybe Gus's story, where we're getting it told, like maybe like because the preserve is already a thing, because that's where he, we learned that in like the first episode, because that also puts it in perspective that like, right, that time frame isn't a 1-to-1, because Gus was like, what, 7 or something when the preserve like flyers were flying down or something like that. He was younger. He wasn't exactly the age he is now, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been like 2 or 3 years. So it had time to like. So that means like whatever time frame this is at the beginning of that, like it's a couple years later when we get to the Gus and everything for her to have. Like I said, it's just that would make. Once again, it's the timeline isn't what I think it is, and I should kind of get used to it. I should keep that in my brain. But now it makes sense what Grant was talking. Not I say Grant, General. I literally said his name earlier, and I'm already blanking on it. What Abbott? That's it. General Abbott. What he was talking about, he was referencing her. Amy. He's after her because it's like she. It's still kind of what I thought it was, but it's like. I associated it with Bear and them, like the Animal Army, instead of the preserve and everything. But it's like, right, it's a place that houses a whole bunch of, it's supposedly going to house, like, be a shelter for a lot of hybrids. It's interesting considering, like, it used to be a zoo, and maybe there's, like, some dark, twisted irony behind that, where it's like, this is supposed to be a safe place for the hybrids, a place that was meant to capture, that held animals as captives and just kind of like showcase them to the world, and then just to have like this be where the hybrids kind of make their new home, their shelter and everything. It's just there's a weird irony to it to a certain extent. It's just all I'm saying when you think about it too much. But I was like, that was such a fascinating review because I didn't even think about the General Abbott thing until I started recording this, and I was like, that's when it hit me. I was like, you can actually hear my realization to a certain extent. So I thought that was kind of a fascinating development. Obviously, going back to the Animal Army, obviously, they rescued Gus, and they're willing to help him, but it's like, yeah, what about, Tommy? It's like, well, kill him, which Gus is like, no, leave him alone. And, Tiger is all about, like, now let's kill him, because it's like, they've never left anyone alive before, but for Bear, it's like, yeah, but we've never found a talking hybrid either, especially later on. It's like a hybrid that wants to protect their poacher, like that's why is what Bear's trying to understand. So welcoming them to, like, well, he's a captive, but welcoming Gus to their home. And it's interesting, like we don't know their actual names, we just know them by the animals that they represent. It's like, draw your favorite animal, and that became their symbol. Bear's the leader and everything, so Gus is kind of king for a day. And it's like, oh, Dad said like candy would rot your teeth, and it's just like it shows that kid with super rotten teeth. You're like, oh, but it's that kid thing of like, oh, you have the privilege of not having parents around, so you can do whatever you want to. I guess you can borderline some like Lord of the Flies type of situation. I think that's a parallel you can draw, even though I'm not well versed in it. I've never read the books. I've never seen them, because I know there's a movie. I know they were working on a reboot adaptation. I remember years ago we were hearing something about that, where they're like doing, like, instead of all boys, it was going to be an all female version of the Lord of the Flies, if I remember correctly. I remember hearing about that years ago. I don't know if anything ever happened into that. Once again, I've never even seen the original nor read the book, but I get the basic premise of it to at least some extent. But it just kind of reminded me of that a little bit, I guess you could almost think of it as a little Neverlandish to a certain extent as well. Peter Pan type and Wendy type of storyline and stuff. But I guess she kind of is kind of like the Peter Pan in this case, like not wanting any of the kids to kind of grow up. So you can definitely see that. But obviously, like, Gus is kind of enjoying, like, it's like, oh, he gets to be in those bumper cars and everything. But so there's also the conversation, like, right, you're looking for your mom. Because Bear opens up about the fact is a lot of them don't have parents. In particular, her parents were killed by last men. And it's like, for them, it's like, they talk about it later on when he's at the computers and stuff like that, of like, because it's like, he's like, oh, see, in the game I get to be you, but it's like, why would you want to be me? My friend Rusty told me about the fact is that people blame us for the sick, like, why, and people hate us, like, why would you want to? It's like, but those people are wrong. You guys aren't responsible for the sick. We don't know who is, but it's not you guys. She thinks they're actually like, you were brought into this world because actually everything got a little bit better. It's like, we put a whole bunch of trash in the sea, we put crap in the sky, and it's like, the world can now heal because of you guys. That it's like, you guys are the next step to healing this world from all the damage that we did, in particular grown-ups. It's like, grown-ups broke this world, and now we kind of have to live and suffer through the world that they made. So, once again, begging, whether or not this was a man-made thing or whether this is nature legitimately striking back at humanity for doing what it's doing, And the hybrids are meant to be that next step forward for potentially fixing or restoring the planet. Who knows? But obviously it's like, right, you could stay here, but Gus is like, nah, I want to go with the big man to see my mom. And it's like, for her, she starts kind of being like, kind of talking about the fact is, like, when you're young, you kind of want to trust people, and it's kind of, you end up trusting the wrong people, and kind of saying, obviously pointing Gus towards, like, you're kind of trusting the wrong person. Your big man, he's not the good guy that you think he is. He's actually one of the bad people, even saying that he was a last man. And so, obviously, she's like, yeah, you want to tell Gus who you are? He was like, oh, being cheeky, being like, oh, I didn't know you guys were football fans. And she shows the symbol and everything, and he's like, right, I was a last man, but I quit. That's not me anymore. But for her, it's like, regardless of anything, you've killed a lot of people. Other people, like, you've kidnapped kids just like Gus. But for him, it's like, you're young. What were you, 5 when the world went to the way it was? The fact is, a lot of people did whatever it took to survive. I did too. But for her, it's like, no, you did what, it wasn't just about survival, doing what you did, kidnapping kids like Gus. It's like, no, you did it because you were good at it, so I think he does, like, when he looks at Gus, that's probably even more reason why he doesn't want to be around Gus, because it's a constant reminder of what he did. And I'm sure it hurts even more when it's like, despite everything, Gus is still defending him. It's like, right, he's going to die, but it's like, Gus is like, no, you've hurt people. And she's like, what? It's like, yeah, those men you hurt them. Like, he's hurt people, but you've also hurt people too. But it's like, he's helped me too. Like, it's like, she said, like, oh, would he call you friends? It's like, no, he's never actually said it. But for him, it's like, regardless, he doesn't have to say it. I know we're friends, But obviously, even then at the end, like, he's still, Tommy's still like, no, kid, like, don't worry about me. I've always been fine on my own. So you just go and go find your mom. We also got I guess it makes sense in the grand scheme of things because he is like he is a year older, but he did talk about like he doesn't remember how long he was alone, but he was like, yeah, I was alone all season, all of the season, so it was a whole year. To be fair, he went from like 9 to 10, but I didn't know if it was like a couple months, because we did see at one point it did get winter, but it did kind of pass through all of the seasons and stuff, so he was alone for a long time. So, but he comes over and stops them, hugs the big man. He's like, oh, kid, I think it just, it warmed that heart of his that kind of got cold a little bit over these past 9 years, doing whatever he needed to survive. So, interesting development on that front. But obviously when the time comes, Bear, like, they're getting the execution ready, but Bear stops it. Because for her, it's like, we made a promise, like, we were going to protect the hybrids from harm, but us doing this, killing this man, yes, he's a bad guy, but she's like, I think I've led you all down the wrong path. I made this more about revenge rather than focusing on helping hybrids. We're just all about killing last men and getting back at them for the families that were taken from us. All that they've done to the hybrids. We've been so focused on revenge rather than 100% protecting. And obviously, if we hurt this man, we're going to be hurting a hybrid. So no execution. But Tiger kind of basically forms a coup right now, and it's like, no, you've forgotten what this is all about. Like, he's brainwashed Gus, and now he's brainwashed you. He needs to die. And so they have a tiger locked up, and they're about to release it. Some of them are still holding it with a chain because they're with Bear, and they don't want to do this because Bear gave the order. But Tiger's like, no, let it go, open the door. But in that moment, Gus jumps down and he talks to it, and it backs down. Like, hybrids have a special connection. And it was what I was wondering, like, is it just each respective animal? But it's like, no, they have a very, like, special communication and, like, connection with nature as a whole. So he was able to, like, talk to the tiger and communicate with it. Like, that's why I think they are so important. Like Bear said, like, they are the ones who can help heal this planet. But they close the door, and then obviously it turns into who are you siding with, Bear or Tiger? And obviously Tiger's kind of taking control now. And it's like, if you're with Bear, you're against all of us. So maybe those who were with Bear, like, surrendered or, decided to join the other side, or maybe they're still, because obviously, like, this family she built for herself, sadly, is falling apart. Luckily, well, Gus and Tommy were able to get away, but in this moment you have Bear, like, following behind, and she, like, she was hoping to keep Gus around, not just because he was special, but it's that whole conversation about wanting to sometimes you find family, almost like basically find family in the most unexpected places. Like, you don't expect to find family, and you do. And the sad thing is, in that moment, Bear kind of lost her family. Like, she built all this for one moment. It's like, we're supposed to be a family, but in that moment, like, everyone turned against her. So she ends up dropping her mask. And I was wondering if she was going to follow Tommy and Gus. Maybe she will later on. Maybe like her and whatever group of people support her follow afterwards. I don't know. But maybe it takes a little while. Maybe sticking around makes her regret, like, I can't be here anymore. This isn't the family I believed in anymore. Sadly, it's like they were going to demonize and not believe that he could change from being a last man, but now it's like, right, like, look at these, like, this group I brought together, and they've turned against me and what I've kind of believed, what we used to kind of all believe, We kind of lost ourselves along the way, and now they'll try to course correct us. It kind of backfired. I mean, Tiger, like, throughout the episode, Tiger was already being like, yo, so let's go. And she's like, no, we'll go when I'm ready, because she was basically like, I'll give the order. And then also the whole thing about killing Tommy, and it's just all this, that. It's like she's just been undermining Bear's orders the entire episode. So we'll ultimately have to wait and see where things kind of go on that front. And another front is catching up with Dr. Singh and Rani. I said Ronnie. But obviously after the aftermath at Doug's, it's like, okay, cool. And it's like he's reluctant to go down this path, but it's like he kind of has no choice. And even Randy, and it hurts her in multiple ways, because it's like, right, the only way we're going to survive is if you do find a cure, and the only cure is we need a living hybrid, because basically they need the secret sauce. Or was it the special sauce or the secret? I think it was the secret sauce. Maybe it was special sauce. Whatever the case may be. I'll end up correcting myself after the fact. Looking up really quickly, it is secret sauce. But basically, it's like pulling from a specific gland and combining that with bone marrow stem cells and stuff like that. That's kind of like the secret sauce. I was about to call it special again. And he's reluctant to go down this route, but he knows that his wife is right. But the point I was making is, like, for her, it's the guilt of, you have to do this because of me. You've always sacrificed and done a lot for me, and now I'm kind of asking you to do it. So it makes her feel even more guilty of, like, right, me being alive and sick and everything is causing you to do this. But as he's leaving, obviously Nancy's like, oh yeah, there's a flower here. We got to get rid of those little buggers. So it's like, yeah, kind of saying like, oh, it doesn't mean anything, Audie being like, they grow all the time, and she's like, right, I got to be too careful, It's like, oh, the whole duck thing. It's like, we're just so nonchalant. We're just kind of like moving on. She talks about it later on that basically they've had 3 incidents like that in the past 6 months. Which I guess it's like, for them, it's like, we barely survived the first wave. This could be another wave brewing. It's like, I mean, to be fair, that's so spread out. I mean, we don't know how consecutive they were in those 6 months. Were they like one every 2 months? Was it one at one point, then a little while later it was 2? We don't know. But obviously it's getting him more nervous. It's like, but she's like, oh yeah, I haven't seen Ranny. Like, what? It's like, oh, she drank too much. It was our anniversary. Oh, no, isn't that great? It's just like, she's getting super. She was already kind of eyeing you last episode, so she has her suspicions. It's like, to be fair, like, everyone is in a heightened state. She's like in a very, like, it seems like she's the head honcho. She's like the neighborhood watch, which is, I mean, it's a. She's a post-apocalyptic Karen, I guess if you want to really do that. I guess you could make that comparison, but it's just like, I think she's supposed to be a post-apocalyptic personification of just someone who is just all about, like, oh, you doing it, like, everyone be on their P's and, not necessarily P's and Q's, but more like, everything has to kind of go her way. She kind of runs the neighborhood, is all I'm trying to say. So obviously he shows up at work and he pulls out a specific suitcase that has like flares, and you shoot up this flare of what you want, because that's what I was wondering, like, oh, you haven't, I thought a supply was going to come on its own, but it's like you have to like let them know what you want. So he sends up the purple flare, which means, hey, bring me that special ingredient. So, but by the time he gets back, Nancy's there being like, oh yeah, like, we got to do something about that mandatory test, which Audie's like, no, there's not enough kits around to do that. And it's kind of like a no, but she's like, no, we'll just have to bring it in front of everyone. the community. He's like, yeah, I guess the community would decide. It's like, okay. And she's like, yeah, I hope you enjoyed your anniversary. It's like, anniversary? And then Audie looks at her, Ronnie's like, she's like, it was your anniversary yesterday, right? And she's like, right. You know, with everything that went on with Doug, I'm just kind of a little scattered. And he's like, right. And she's leaving, and it's like, oh, boy. We don't know what it was, the circumstances that led her back there, but I guess she found or saw something that told her that Ronnie was sick. And at that point, it's like, oh, I'm going to tell everyone. He's like, no. Like, the fact is, I'm working on something. He's trying to say he's working on a cure, but she doesn't want to listen. That heightened paranoia. Like, obviously, we're going to have to burn this place down. Once again, I'm curious what that would have meant for Audie as well. Like, would they have been like, oh, you're a traitor, like you betrayed us, you knew she was sick the entire time. Even if he's not sick, they might decide to burn him because it's like, right, who's to say you won't do this for someone else? Maybe there might be retaliation on your part. You know, we're doing all we can to protect each other. It's kind of like the whole point she in particular is trying to make. I was like, oh boy, I thought it was like he's going to push her and then like she's going to fall and hit her head. Wasn't expecting the horse to kick her, and you're like, oh, same result, we just got there a different way. Interesting. And obviously he's like, oh god, she's not breathing. But then Ronnie kind of looks and it's like, let's just bring her inside, like not to worry about it. So they drag her body in. And then you have the narrator being like, sometimes whether or not family is worth it, you know, because family is always worth it. And sometimes we just sure as hell hope so that it's worth it. So all that he's doing for his wife. So that's still a separate enough thing. Obviously you would think like it's going to tie back into Gus as well as like Amy's daughter for being like the special cases they are. I mean, Gus might be even more special in his own regards or case. Who knows? But you'd assume it's going to tie back in that way in some shape or form. We'll ultimately have to wait and see. I'm so interested to see where the next episode takes us with all of this, especially that. I mean, once again, it's like, well, at least we got rid of like the most suspicious person, but then it's like, oh, have you seen Nancy? It's like, oh, those questions are going to come up. She wasn't breathing, but it's like, what if we find out Nancy actually isn't dead? She was just unconscious or something like that, and she wakes up. That could be a whole issue, but now it's like, oh, not only are you going to have to kill a hybrid kid, you've also killed your neighbor. Granted, you didn't, but you're covering it up so that no questions get answered. So this worked out for you, but now they're sinking deeper and deeper into all of this. So, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.